All right. Okay, I'm going to launch this and I'll get the video going.
Cool.
Like me here. Okay.
Okay.
How's my tie? Is it okay? It's on straight.
Here we go.
We're different.
Wisconsin.
Rhode Island.
Hawaii.
New York.
From the Great Lakes,
To the Mountain West.
the Pacific Northwest,
To the South.
and the Northeast.
Coast to coast.
We have differences.
And some disagreements. But Senate Democrats are fiercely united on this.
We are not here because of who we are against.
We are here because of who we are for.
Every one of us.
Was elected to fight for working Americans.
For American families.
For you.
For you.
For you.
We're here to make housing more affordable.
To help working Americans
Keep more of their hard-earned paychecks.
To lower the cost of child care.
Prescription drugs.
And yes, groceries.
To help small businesses thrive.
And every child have a safe and great public education.
We are here to fight.
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 to fight for Americans.
We will work with anyone.
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 If they want to make life better for you.
But
If Donald Trump and Senate Republicans.
do things to hurt you.
We will fight.
We will fight.
If they come after affordable health care.
If they pursue policies that drive up costs,
If they ignore the threat of climate change.
If they come after our troops and veterans' benefits,
If they take away access to reproductive rights.
Attack our basic freedoms.
If they try to enrich their friends.
If they pay for tax cuts for the wealthy by coming after your paycheck.
Your Social Security, your Medicare,
They will have to come through us.
Through us.
through us.
This is a new Congress.
It is a new day.
We are united.
Determined. Ready.
The 119th Congress has begun. All right, let's go.
Let's go.
Let's get to work.
Okay, let's go.
Let's go.
Let's get started.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I think that was a really nice way to start the evening tonight. That the Democrats in the Senate are going to be a critical line of defense here in the Trump 2.0 era. I am Nick Knudsen. I'm the executive director at DemCast USA. For those of you who are not familiar with us, or this is your first time coming to a democracy briefing, welcome. DemCast is a 501c4 nonprofit organization that is dedicated to winning the digital war against right-wing extremists online. We do that by recruiting, engaging, and empowering individuals with social media accounts to spread pro-democracy messaging across all social media platforms. We could not have the impact or do the amazing work that we do without all of you. So thank you so much for your continued digital activism and other forms of activism during a very interesting time in history where your voices are very much needed to help make sure that Americans' freedoms remain intact during a very difficult time. So thank you all so much. Jamie, did we have any other announcements before we get going?
I think the only thing we wanted to say is that, anybody affected by the wildfires in California, we're certainly rooting for you guys. I saw that the weather is not cooperating again. I know I have a lot of friends in California, so just know that we're thinking about you guys and praying for a swift end. Grateful to see all the other states and countries stepping up to help. So
Yeah, thank you so much. We have many DemCasters in California and DemCasters across the country who have family in the affected area, and so we are definitely all holding vigil.
and we do have a document for everybody just with that has any that has all of the, if you want to be able to if you're able to donate to anybody in California, there is all kinds of stuff in here, from animal welfare to displaced households. So these are all vetted resources. They were just dropped in the chat. So if you're able to help out people in California, that's just incredible. So.
And thank you all, however you're able to support people either emotionally or financially. Okay, on with the show. We have a really important and really exciting program for you tonight. Really excited to we're going to start with Joe. So Joe Radosevich is the Vice President of Campaigns and Outreach at the Center for American Progress, CAP Action. Joe is is in the Advocacy and Outreach Department there, and before joining CAP Action, he served in a variety of senior roles for example, Senator Amy Klobuchar and Pennsylvania's Governor Josh Shapiro. So. A great guest, and Joe is going to be here to help us understand the landscape of these Trump nominees. This is a huge story that we're going to be and area for advocacy that we're going to be exploring here for the next few weeks. So Joe, I think you've got a deck or a presentation you're going to share. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be with everyone. I'll just jump in, make sure we have some time for questions. You can see my crazy hair. And all right, so you did a great job of teeing that up about how we're going to talk a little bit about the landscape, because I think it's hard to know sometimes, exactly what nominee or what thing is going to come down the pike over the next quarter. And rather than giving you like, oh, this is the one phrase to use, understand a little bit of like where in the world we're kind of needing to operate within, so we can improve the brand, get back onto the winning side of things, and get people who are off the sidelines re-engaged. So we're going to try to move quick. I also got some new data, like literally just in the last few days. So some of this is going to be first time I'm sharing it. So go easy on me. But the three things that we want to cover are just sort of the populist demands, like a little bit of understanding some of what the electorate wants to hear from Democrats and we're not hearing. Two, you guys probably don't need to hear this, but I just picked two of my favorite slides about like the media landscape right now and what you are such a big part of pushing back against and being part of an affirmative Democratic message that actually engages people who don't get normal news. So I want to show one or two things there. And then we'll probably spend the most time on this third section, which is, there's this interesting tension where Americans have a true, like strong desire for public protection and a government that works, and are very frustrated by the government we have. And whether that's about corruption or inefficiency and other things we can talk about. But I want to be honest about like the tension and difficulty of facing that. And how we can be smart about the fights we pick and how to engage with the Trump administration, especially at a time when, unfortunately, he is at a higher sort of place. He has a greater standing now than he really ever has since he came down the escalator and entered our lives politically in a different way almost 10 years ago. And really being clear-eyed about changing some of our tactics to how to take him down a notch and his administration down a notch, so fewer people are harmed in the immediate terms, and we can tee ourselves up for hopefully a better night in a little less than 2 years. So populist demands. Something that I think is important here is that we've seen in a handful of different research projects that like ideological arguments tend to not really be effective for the people who can be persuaded. They work really well to quickly polarize folks or quickly reach people who maybe read the news. But for folks who are not like that, they don't do much work. We saw this in the Project 2025 work, which we were really engaged on early on. This is one of the first national polls on Project 2025, and just gave got like a straight read on what it did. It had conservative in here 5 times, says Trump administration, and you can see more people, 46%, had favorable views. And maybe tellingly for where the election was about to go, it actually was doing quite well with Hispanic voters, and frankly, not so bad with people under 50 either. Once we got into the harms, right, and once we described Project 2025 in less ideological ways, it tanked, both in the survey and, I mean, frankly, kind of amazingly, by the end of the election, the numbers were even worse than 25 to 66. So we just came back and did some of this on Doge. Don't read the whole paragraph on the left. It's basically supposed to be like what an AP story would be about Doge. And you can see 52%, a lot of people having some favorable views. We'll get to this towards the end, but the same thing is sort of happening. Some of the ideological language just doesn't connect to a lot of people. The other side of this point is about kind of populist demands. I hope people understand that the demand for change is incredibly high. I think this slide is very telling that 76% of people said, the federal government needs major changes or a complete overhaul. And attention is going to be when the Trump administration sort of comes after the federal government. How do we both show that we support the value of what like an EPA does to make sure that we have clean drinking water without just defending the status quo, not aligning ourselves with this 24% of, we only need small changes, when they're the ones who are going to be sort of on the attack. Another way of looking at those populist demands is my favorite tests. This is a max stiff, and what happens there is people see maybe 4 different options at a time, a short paragraph or statement, and they'll pick which one is most or least concerning. They'll do both. And that happens a bunch of times in a row, so you get greater separation between different types of arguments that you might hear. And it really helps us show like what has more salience. And something that was really, I thought, telling and important about this slide is, okay, a score of 100 is basically even, means it would be picked basically half the time, one way or the other. So above 100 means it's more concerning than other things. 201, highest score here, for why the political system doesn't work today, went to extremists, will do anything, including overturning elections, engaging in political violence. But when we looked under the hood about who those folks were, it was really driven by partisan Democrats. It was not driven by people who were up for grabs or could be persuaded. All of these other things that are more populist in nature, so politicians caring about political power or deep-pocketed interests, having unchecked influence, those were much higher for people who actually weren't sure about where they would go or whether or not they would vote. And I think a piece that helps illustrate this on the demographics, I'm really cutting all this work down, is that polarization one. So polarization was 127 here, ranked right in the middle. But on the demographics, the people who said it was a below average problem, younger men, that's not surprising, Black voters, people said government needs a complete overhaul. Some of the really, frankly, important groups for us to be turning out and reaching. The people who thought it was an above average problem, I don't think it's particularly surprising, college-educated Republicans, other college-educated voters, some older voters. And so when we look at all of the different potential problems that we're going to be trying to address with the federal government, the need for reform and that sort of outsider language, the non-status quo language, is the most important for people who didn't vote this time around, people who we need to reach, people who can be persuaded. and the ideological things that we sometimes rely on don't reach them. Information landscape. I think a piece here that I want to just point out, I think I said I had two slides I really liked. One, maybe this is like good just for your elevator speech. The number of people who just actively avoid the news is as high as it's ever been. Reuters Institute does this survey. They do it all over the world, but this was just in the US. And you can see the numbers going up. Now about 40% of people, average them all out, are actively avoiding the news sometimes or often. And I think this helps show that it's not just, I don't know, people don't get a newspaper. It means that when it comes into their feed, they might scroll past it. Or when they see a link, they don't even click on it. So news avoidance is a big issue that we're trying to play around with. One thing, though, maybe more for my policy friends than you guys, some of our editorial standards are leaving people kind of on the sidelines. The number of people, this is under 35, who say that they avoid the news because they struggle to understand it is as high as 15%. It's not huge, but it is a lot of people that we're leaving just by the kind of language we're using. And as much as I think sometimes we might make fun of Trump for speaking in really simple ways, this is probably about the average, level of literacy in the country. So really being conscious about using language that is simple, clear, non-ideological, connects both the populist demand and the information landscape we're in. Last slide on this front. I think Republicans probably learned some of the need to engage on social media because they had no choice. Not because they were like too smarter or they had these dark overlords. On the left here, you can see that from 2016 to 2024, Republicans' trust in national news organizations plummets, and their trust in social media sites basically stays the same. It goes up a tiny bit towards the end, and their trust in local news also declines a little bit. So if you're a Republican elected official, you've had to figure out how to use social media to talk to your people already. Democrats as a whole, not a lot of change over these last few years, with local and national news doing pretty well at the top here, really no degradation of support for national news, and social media quite a bit further down. However, for younger voters, 18 to 29, this other portion that's selected on the right in that box, you can see social media up at 52, national news organizations 56. So when we're trying to reach anyone who's independent, who especially is younger, it's totally different in terms of our information landscapes than as a party as a whole. So that's like a whole presentation that I just tried to do in 3 slides. Anyway, so on public protection and some of the dynamics here. I pointed out, Americans have this strong desire for a government that protects them, that works, that can provide clean water, that can respond when there's a disaster. But they do have real frustrations with government efficiency. That's not just something that the right has made up. And we can't align ourselves with the status quo. We need to show some impatience. Quick, background down here. Hopefully it's not too surprising. Federal bureaucrats, not a great term. Federal agencies starting to do a little bit better. Public agencies, even better than that. I think a reminder that the legal system, which we really relied on in 2017 to push back on things Trump did, it does not have overwhelming persuasive power with the American public, right? I mean, it's basically split even. Other surveys have shown it underwater. And so relying too much on the courts, not only do I think that is foolhardy because of what the Supreme Court looks like, but it also doesn't do the organizing, the political, the persuasion work that it might have done 10 years ago. When we get into some of these challenges around maybe a federal rule that they're going to attack, that's something that's going to be happening over the next few quarters here, or a particular group of civil servants. Any kind of specificity helps, really. It helps improve favorability. And so if you're thinking about, a message you're putting out or a video you're doing, greater specificity helps. We've seen this in a handful of tests. I think this one's pretty clear, though. Civil servants, that's better than bureaucrats, but civil servants like an engineer, even better than that. When we looked at this one's new, just kind of came back, some attention on Elon Musk. I think the short version of this is Trump is actually fairly strong. Everything else in the Republican orbit is not showing like some additional brand strength. Project 25, super unpopular. Elon Musk still underwater. RFK was the best of any of the other Republicans we tested. He's kind of even, just slightly underwater. But we tested a bunch of other Republican figures, and most of them are kind of looking like Musk here. For Trump, his favorability being a little bit negative, but his job approval being a little bit positive. We've seen that trend up when he was previously in power. But this is the highest kind of watermark that we have had for him. I think we have a hand raised, but we'll try to get to, I'll be quick here and then we'll probably take questions. The coming challenge is really about people do have skepticism about how the government works, as I pointed out, but they also really want the value of it. So federal agencies should set strong rules to protect consumers and workers. More people, 63%, say that, as opposed to the bureaucrats have too much power. So this is in the data we just got back, and we tried to look into specifically, all right, you're upset with how the federal government works, but you want some of these things to actually be provided. Who is at fault? What is at fault? We've done previous versions of this. If we put corruption in there, it would be number one. We wanted to get out of that. We wanted to get a little more specific about what else. We did include government waste and inefficiency. That's the one on the top left, because Republicans are going to inject that into the conversation. And it did quite well. But next, we have elected officials, we have extremists, we have some of these people we expect. But we separated out billionaires versus wealthy donors. And one of the big takeaways that I do want to mention, because I know it's getting a lot of attention online, when we separate billionaires from the influence or the harms that their influence can cause, it is not particularly concerning to people. And that's not like billionaires are popular, but just their mere presence isn't convincing to people. Our reality is more cynical than that. They expect that there will be self-dealing. They know that politicians are going to be working to raise money. We need to go another step and show the consequences on people. That's what the next few slides are going to show. But this just separated out billionaires versus wealthy donors. And you can see the donor element, that added element of what they're actually doing, made them get a lot more blame. This similar test, slightly different, but we combined billionaires and wealthy donors. It's the top one that's not a partisan cue. The top two here are extremists in the Republican Party or Democratic Party. And so we thought that was a useful test to show the difference between those two. Last section here is about party traits. Ask this question around, do you think this trait describes Republicans better or Democrats better? And there's some tough news here, but something we want to point out is it's not in the slide exactly. Democrats have this bias towards we get credit for listening, and Republicans get credit for action, for sort of doing. We have seen this in a number of different ways. That I'll just share with all of you, and you can noodle on it because I haven't finished the thought on it. Taking on corruption is tied 50-50. That's another one that has been fairly similar, but is an issue that we need to tackle because that can't be. I'll get to the next slide here. Here's why. There is an expectation that Republicans are more likely to engage in self-dealing, that they're more likely to use the government for their financial gain. And you can see much more likely to serve the wealthy, 34-66. That's a little baked in. What is not is this who's going to take the corruption on. if Democrats can show a little bit more punch on this piece of corruption, it is not swimming upstream. It's actually going with people's expectations about what Republicans are likely to do in office. So one of the things that we really found in this, checkup on the partisan traits was that Republicans are still held. There's this expectation they are going to engage in corrupt behavior. What is a little left out is whether or not Democrats are going to demand accountability and hold them out. And this is why that action piece I was trying to mention before, because we'll hold people accountable. Republicans have a 5-point advantage. And we see this as an element that can connect some of the brand weaknesses on the Republican side with all of these nominees. This through line of corruption, which doesn't only need to be quid pro quo and like the donors they have, but sort of corrupt policies, we think is going to be a big element for the entire year or the entire Congress. Some quick points on Doge, because I know it's in the news, people might be interested. They're not walking in with some huge advantage in this forced choice. More people think that Musk and Ramaswamy will use Doge to benefit themselves and put money in their own pockets, to that previous point about Republicans using the government to benefit themselves, rather than using it to help the American people. And you can see the intensity behind this is pretty high, with 39% saying strongly that way. Compare that to Trump, and this is another big point here. We do not trust civil servants over Trump by nearly as much. They still have an advantage, 53 to 47, but compared to where we were before, let me just change the slide. There's another version of this one where we don't change this language at all. It's probably hidden here. And the number that go against sort of the Trump administration is about twice as high when it's compared to Musk as opposed compared to Trump. So like Trump is a stronger avatar for them than Musk. So this Trump number is 53 and for civil servants. And then when it's against Musk, it's up at 57. I'll change that before that gets sent around. Last one here is about how do we attack the Republican agenda? We tried a bunch of things. Many of them are clips from articles. We tried to take things that we were really saying, like Democrats were really saying. And we can give you all the language here. I know this is just like a one-word version. But the themes that kind of came out of this for us, one, just talking about the billionaire cabinet didn't do much work. We had to show more specific consequences of the corruption. And both cuts and alone at the top here, alone was about this idea that government's not going to be there to protect you from this harm. Both cuts and alone are getting to be about services and more specific impacts. The ideological arguments, again, similar to what we were seeing with Project 2025 and some other work we've done, not as effective. So conservative, just the big corporations. We needed to name how people were harmed much faster. And so here that is what leads us to this framework, which tries to distill last 10 minutes down to something you can use. One, we want to be defending the American people, not our institutions. People don't think the institutions work. They are frustrated with the status quo, and they doubt that they're really up to the task. And we need to focus on the overall value. So, clean water for the EPA. For OMB, we have Russ Vought getting, going into the OMB. Their job is to implement the budget that Congress passed, not hold it up and decide it all for themselves from the White House. We're always going to be trying to remind officials to go back to the basic value. Trump is their strength, corruption is their weakness. And whenever we injected Trump into the questions, that Republican side performed better. Whereas we continued to see this threat of the expectation of corruption from them. Project 2025, we think, helps connect some of that, but this should be a two-way conversation. We want to know what's actually working, what actually people are engaging with, and I'm open to to that not being the case. I think we spend a lot of time telling people they're going to do Project 2025. And if they start doing it and we don't talk about it, I do think there's a credibility issue there. And there is great awareness. They had still 90 some percent of people having being able to express an opinion about Project 2025. Sorry, 87% name ID, with only 13 saying they'd, not heard of it. Be the outsiders. I think this is a little bit more for electeds friends than maybe some of you, but just the language that we use and some of the ways that we try to jump into conversations as opposed to just pushing our own views, I think can be a big piece of how we identify potential fights. Housing, I think, is a great example here, something that doesn't always get talked about in Washington, but people are really concerned about, and we can attach, other discussions, and we can weigh in on those conversations in a way that's effective. Another view, some people like do's and don'ts. Not going to run through it all again, but kind of the same type of thing. And I think with that, I see that Linda has her hand raised, and I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully we take a few questions. I hand it over to Heather. Oh, there's a Q.
Jamie, you're muted.
So we have quite a few questions.
I'll also do questions, when this is done in the chat. I'll do that.
Thank you. That's nice, Joe. Thank you.
Have you shared this with the Democratic leadership?
We have, and we'll be doing more.
People in red states have been told that it's always the Democrats' fault, even when all of the power is held by Republicans. How can we combat this?
I mean, that's a very good question that I think is about our information landscapes. And, something that we need to invest in is just, well, there's a lot of things we have to do here, but in terms of what each of us have some power to do, joining existing conversations where people are expressing some frustration, maybe it's about like what's happening with insurance rates on housing. Republicans have a good way of doing this with their ecosystem. They will just jump into a conversation that people are upset about and say some policy view or blame Democrats about it. And then a whole bunch of people who have already started talking about this issue hear that point. That is something that all of us can do a better job on, including electeds, including CAP. But it really just takes trying to listen for salient conversations that are already happening, as opposed to only amplifying and pressing out the things we have. Lori, I will answer this because other people probably have it. This most recent survey was a battleground survey about 40 House districts. We oversampled in states that are going to have Senate races in 26. The sample probably skews a little bit more conservative for that reason. Whereas if we did a national sample, it would probably be, a point or two more Democratic. We also oversampled Black, self-identified Hispanic, and API voters. That's that short answer.
And then the final question we'll take tonight is, when groups are presented with Democratic and Republican policy platforms without the party labels, they support the Democratic policy. So how do we get that message out and simplify it?
No, I think that's a great point. And I think part of always helpful, right, to add that partisan kind of element because of those perceptions of the brand. I think there are two pieces here, though. When we only get to policy, we are missing how a lot of people make a decision. And the trust in the individual or in the brand here really does matter. There are some people, like DFP does some great work on this exact point, where we will add Democrats say or Republicans say in front of a statement sometimes, and we won't at other times. And it can have these, huge changes. The problem is when we get to a ballot, that's still an element that we have to deal with. And so when we are facing like a nominee or a regulatory issue, sometimes we don't need to be partisan. We don't need to be ideological, and we can make a lot of ground up. We can do quite well because people actually support that position, like you said. But when we get into, an election and a candidate, then that work we've done kind of goes away, right? And it can't be extended to them. And I think that that is a challenge that we are going to have to go through about picking when we are trying to pick fights that help define the brand in a better way. Um, anyway, I think that's a very complicated question, like some of the ballot results in like Missouri, for example, would show. Um, but there is no way to shortcut or to get around the perception of the party. We can't only go to ideology because that's not what is going to be greeting people on a ballot.
And I just
Talk about the Democratic brand. I mean, that's the question of the year. We're trying. We got to start with picking little fights that help show who we really are, and not making mistakes, frankly, over the next few months with Trump picking specific battles, and that's part of why we did so much work here on like government efficiency, right? If we were to fall in, Sarah, to your question here about if we were to fall into the trap of just sort of defending the status quo over the next few months, we would be in an even worse position than we are now. I know that that is not always like the most exciting answer, right? Like we want to be like proactive too, but they are going to get to pick some fights. And so not screwing up those is pretty important.
Awesome, Joe. Great, excellent presentation. As we've said in the chat, we are going to share the recording here and the slides and all that with everybody after the fact. So if it seemed fast for you, like you'll have the opportunity to go back and review everything. And I just like the implications of the research that you're doing here is just it's so helpful for us as we march even through through this nomination these nomination hearings, and like how do we talk about these nominees and some of the insights around talking about the federal bureaucracy and civil servants and the impact that those things have on the real impacts that they have on people's lives. This is really helpful for us as we sort of figure out how to resist some of the more monstrous Trump nominees. So super thankful for you joining. Thanks, Joe.
Of course, and I'm just going to drop one Q&A that's kind of already done here that does have like I'd call it a framework of like how to develop remarks and talking points. And it really follows start with the value we share, name the villain, ask a question, as opposed to, sometimes it's easy to say like, oh, well, don't be ideological. I think this helps really show like, all right, I'm going to gauge on this topic, can follow this framework. But thank you all.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks so much. Jamie, you can you introduce our next illustrious guest?
Yes. So I am excited. Heather Booth, she is one of my heroes. She has been an activist for many years, one of the original founders of the Janes. She has been on the front lines in this fight. She headed up the progressive for the
Grassroots for first for Biden and then for Harris.
Yes. So blew that one. So anyway, she is here to kind of give us a refresher course on how we actually organize to fight this disaster in the next 2 years, because we're going to take back the House. So, then we'll have a little bit easier time. So take it away, Heather.
Well, I mostly want to thank you, both Jamie and Nick, and DemCast overall. You are among the most important actors we have for advancing democracy and justice in these very challenging times. And really appreciate all of you. And Joe, your presentation, I was taking notes on it. I just feel it is so parallel to many of the points that I'm going to try and convey, as well as learning from some of the specifics that you've tested and outlined. What I was asked to talk about was how the online organizing that all of you do relates to the on-the-ground organizing and long-term issue campaigns in between the elections to lay the basis for them. And to think of yourselves as organizers. Yes, you are influencers. Yes, you're communicators, but you're organizers. You're people who pull others together to take shared action on shared values for a shared purpose. That's what an organizer does. Now, the campaign we just came through was obviously a devastating loss, and it'll have a terrible impact with threats to so many. We're seeing it now with the votes on immigration, but on healthcare, on voting, on civil rights, on reproductive freedom, on almost everything we care about. But we should also remember and carry on with the confidence, you may have covered this on other calls, that it was a very close campaign. 1.6% of the vote. We had 48.3% of the vote, and Trump had 49.9% of the vote, not even a majority. And the most disturbing fact, though, is that there were 19 million people who had voted for Biden who declined to show up and didn't vote. The real issue wasn't the switch of votes from Democrat to Republican or Republican to Democratic. That was only 4% either way. The real issue may not even have been message. It's that people's lives were not getting better, and they voted to disrupt the system or just stay home. This is about the reality, and we have to change the reality, and I believe we change it through ongoing organizing, 365 days a year in between the elections. Now, when an election is this close, it can mean many things went wrong and lots to learn from, but it also means many things went right. But there are lessons we really need to learn from. And on organizing, on the connecting with people's lives 365 days a year, there are at least 3 key principles that I want to share as an organizer. This is not as a social media expert, which you are, but I bring the organizing background. The first is we need to engage what people's interest is and how they understand their reality, not starting with what we want to sell or promote, but by starting with how people see their own lives. In the campaign, we were often so focused on showing the good work that we were doing, and we did so much good work: the Inflation Reduction Act, the PACT Act, reducing student debt, addressing climate, reproductive freedom, and so much else. But we didn't begin with the reality of people's lives. They were struggling. They didn't feel their life was getting better. They feared for themselves and their children. And then we need to show, as that first video that was shown as DemCast was opening up, we need to show that we're fighting for them and with them, and name who we're fighting against. I actually learning from what Joe just said. If we're fighting on taxes, for example, we're really fighting because the wealthy billionaire donors are going to take away our health care to pay for tax breaks for those wealthy billionaire donors. But it's our health care that people care about, not just that they're billionaires. So we start with people's reality. The second is we build a relationship with them in an ongoing way, not just selling our ideas, but showing we care about people. In organizing, we want to know, how are their kids? Do they have a birthday coming up? Are they facing an illness? Is there the fires in California? What can we do to support them in their struggles and their joys? And we have to share times of sharing that joy as well as that struggle, their hopes and sorrows. And the third principle within organizing, I think, is then to show how by fighting together, we can win and build power together and build confidence. We need to be agents of hope when we fight together. And to do this, we need an integrated campaign on the issues. So often we just look at one tactic and not an overall strategy. Yes, a Twitter storm or a Facebook picture change or blue-skied rainbow, whatever the specific tactic might be, they all may be important. But there are some strategic questions to ask about the long-term campaign. And right now, there are campaigns developing on many issues, on taxes and healthcare and housing. But think about what a long-term campaign is and how we fit in. There are at least 5 categories I'd like to propose that we consider as we're looking at the elements of a strategic campaign. The first, and probably obvious, is what are our values and goals? What do we want to win? How do we escalate over time? What's short-term, mid-term, long-term? What are we really fighting for? The second are the decision makers. Who are the people who are able to solve the problem? And can we name them? Can we go after them? They may be elected officials, but they may be administrators, cabinet members, judges, CEOs, and we need to know their names, familiarize people with who they are. The third is our constituencies. Who are the people that we need to pull together very specifically, not just like all Americans, but who do we need to pull together? Who are those 19 million people who voted for Biden but not Kamala? What do we do in red districts, in blue districts, in purple districts? What do we do for urban supporters who didn't come out? What do we do in rural areas, suburban areas, Black, Latino, Asian American, Native American, and then distinguishing factors within all of those groups? It may sound obvious, but often we create messages that go out to a general public. The fourth category is then we consider tactics. What's the best approach in the red, blue, or purple areas? Does mass protest work? Does it show we can solve the problems? Does it turnout work? Does civil disobedience work? In many ways, I feel I probably had more civil disobedience arrests than your average person, though I'm generally very law-abiding. But does that now persuade people that we are more powerful or less powerful? Does it persuade people that they want to be with us or are frightened of us? And sometimes the answer will be different depending on the issue. Do mockery and humor work? Or is it better to show sympathy? Or both, and what works with one group or another? So the tactics will vary depending on where it fits in with a strategy. And then the fifth category are the resources. Do we have the resources to pull out the strategy, the funding, the leadership? How many leaders do we want to develop? How many members are we trying to recruit? Not just get the impressions on the social media, so important, but how many actually turn out and take some action? And how can we test that? What are our recruitment goals? And then, of course, the messaging and communications that Joe and others have talked about are so crucial. The strategy means we connect the on-the-ground plans and the social media plans. Online, we need to also promote the organizing, the local leaders, the strategy and the action. It's not either or, but it's both together. There'll be so many struggles, and you are central to these struggles. The more we have an integrated plan, the more we have a shared strategy based on our values, the more you are involved in the planning of that strategy, the more we are likely to not only protest, but to win. You're doing amazing and essential work to build our power in order to win for people. And I look forward to celebrating our victories together. Thank you, DemCast.
I'm not ready to go.
Fired up, ready to go. Heather, you are just one of the most inspirational people in our movement, and I'm just eternally grateful that you're on our side and that you joined us tonight. Thank you so much. Jamie, did we have any Q&A questions for Heather?
Let's see. Who are the 19 million, and any ideas why they didn't vote this time?
Yeah. We won't really know until we get the voter files, and that may not be, some we'll get in February, some we may not get till March, but it's a critical issue. And there are different kinds of people. My bet is, Joe may have some insights on this too, but my bet is there are people who in 2020 believed, because they believed their lives weren't getting better, they said, we don't want any more of Trump, and Biden is going to fight for us. And then they still didn't see their lives were getting better. And they decided that it was probably better to either not even be involved in the process and let those who were even going to support a predator, a liar, a bully, but at least he would disrupt the system. And I think that's why a number of people who voted for Trump voted for him. But I mostly think it's because people gave up. Now, there were also some other marginal reasons. I think there's some who felt, well, we've protected reproductive freedom by voting pro-reproductive freedom in some of the elections, and Trump really won't take it away. I mean, one of the most shocking figures I heard was that, and Joe, tell me if this is right, that white, non-college educated women who were pro-choice voted 2-1 for Trump. Anyway, there are, but for why the 19 million did not vote, I think people gave up. Some may have assumed that Kamala was going to win, but I really think it was, they didn't think it would make enough of a difference, that they wouldn't make enough of a difference. Their life wasn't getting better. And that's why I think what Joe raised and what that first video showed, we have to show we are fighting for real people, not on abstract ideology, but on the concrete realities of our lives, that we're going to protect our health care, that we're going to ensure there isn't the price gouging, and that we'll be involved in strategic campaigns to win on these issues. Joe, did you have a further comment on that?
No, you nailed it. I do think that the work we have and the data we have so far, and we have some states have come back, but not all. That'll be April, as you said. Really informs why we're stressing right now to make the fight about defending the American people and not these systems, not the bureaucracy. Like, people are very not just fed up, but didn't see Democrats delivering those things. And I think there's a way to read some of this as moderation, but really where it's about persuasion to vote. That it matters to show up. And this corruption lane can do both. It's a way to kind of do both of what we need to do with the independents who are always showing up and the people who are just ready to be done. So yeah, we completely agree.
Very, very
And I mean,
helpful.
and I can tell you locally in a red state that a lot of Democrats don't vote because they don't feel like their vote matters. So, especially in a presidential or congressional race. So when I was out locally door knocking, I made it local, but still go up on the ballot. But, we can flip the county council, and we actually did flip it by 123 votes out of 1.5 million cast.
I also think it's why, at this point in particular, we have to be agents of hope that we can have a better life. The diminished hope, the diminished belief that we can make a difference, that it doesn't matter whatever we do, is probably the worst legacy of this period. And so we need to be the agents of hope based on a concrete strategy. And I end with this. There are now campaigns being designed on taxes, on healthcare, on housing, on immigration, on all sorts of issues. We need to think about it as a campaign that moves forward to build power, not just one random action or another. The messaging matters, but the focus on the building power over time, especially with a 2-year timeline in those districts that will allow us to take back the House, have an impact on the Senate, and for the local races that are there. But we do that by organizing locally on the ground and combining it with the power of your social media and your influence. Thank you all for what you do.
So I have there's two questions. First is, what do you think the first steps in getting on the ground and the online planning in place that we need to address?
Well, in part, it's the gathering of the people together. And there are now operations that are beginning like this. Speaker Pelosi just had an online call for a kickoff of a momentum around healthcare. The next step will be pulling together those groups that actually are working on the issue and working together. And how will we outline a plan over time? There's a group working on taxes that now is going to have a weekly meeting of all of those interested, from unions to local community groups to service centers, some doing C3 work, some doing C4 work. But to gather people together, it's about the real organizations combined with the power of the online media. And on veterans, I see that question critically important, but there are veterans groups. Vote Vets has been a powerful voice, as well as several other veteran groups, and leading with veteran concerns that they are going to cut veteran benefits to give tax breaks to the wealthy billionaire donors. That is one of the strongest arguments we can make, but it means we need the veterans' voices themselves to be speaking to their own community and to the rest of us.
And then the last question, so been an information activist fighting alt-right disinformation for 8 years. I'm stuck, not knowing what to do next when my gut is saying that a culture whose majority could elect a felon and a rapist, a bully who tried to destroy our democracy, might not be worth saving. This is far more about politics. It's about our society. Any advice?
Well, one is a mindset, and we kind of addressed this before. If people believe that the system is not working for them, they know Trump is a bully. That for most people, I mean, there are those who are strictly just white nationalist, Christian, fundamentalist, racist, sexist, and that is true. But that's not our audience. But for the large majority who voted, they know Trump is a bully. He's self-centered. He's egotistical. He's a predator. But he's strong enough to try and take on this system and pull down the parts that are not working for me in my life. Are you a fighter for me? Or are you just talking at me? Are you telling me what you've done for me? Or you're listening to how I'm in pain and I need help? Protect my health care. Help me protect my health care. Let me be part of a campaign together with you. And then when we fight together, it's more likely that we win. It's one of the reasons I loved that initial video you showed, because it was an image of Democrats as fighters.
I would just add to these beautiful and amazing thoughts. I urge people not to overinterpret the election results. And just to remind folks that nations across the country in this post-COVID era are jettisoning incumbents. And Joe Biden was the incumbent. Kamala Harris took his spot. Trump managed to make himself the outsider, even though he's a former president. And what we need to really focus on, what, as Heather's saying, what people are really upset about in their lives. They're upset because they can't afford childcare, and they have to just like choose to not work because it's not even worth it, because childcare is so expensive. They're they're concerned about the cost of education for their children. They're concerned about the cost of housing, and they're just disgruntled. I'm disgruntled. I feel all these things too. and I think like really honing in on where people are is our project for the next couple of years as we try and approach the midterms and meet people where they're at. And as Joe was saying in his presentation, like the abject corruption of the Trump administration, like they're not hiding it. Like there is fertile ground for us to message on the wealthy donors rather than the billionaires. Thank you, Joe. The wealthy donors who are basically buying policy that will help them and exclude everybody else. And so I just think we need to, as Heather's saying, we need to listen. We need to meet people where they're at. Make it about what we're fighting for, rather than blaming people for the way that they voted or whatever. Like we have to just let that go. Because they voted for a variety of reasons, and largely, as Heather said, we got the racists and we got the misogynists, and they're baked into the Trump cake. That's just part of the deal. But there's just a bunch of people who voted for Trump because they thought like, it's not working for me right now, and he's different. And so we need to sort of take that mantle of, we are the people who are going to come in and help you because we understand what you're facing and we have ideas that can help you. So it's not an easy problem to solve, especially in this information landscape, as we've discussed tonight. But it's something that we have to do, and we have to win. We just have to win.
We lost the House by 7,400 votes. 7,400 votes, and we would have actually gained control of the House. That is how tight the margins were. 7,400 votes across 3 districts. So
that's a great frame to close on, Jamie.
We will send out the slides, and Heather has a strategy document that she went over tonight that we will send out, and as well as all of the links. So be on the lookout for that tomorrow, but we will send all of these slides out. So, and yes, Nick Simon's fabulous.
Yeah. The next week is going to suck. We're all in this together, guys. We have tools at our disposal to influence the people in our lives and the people across the country, and we can do this. Let's weather this week. He's going to take the oath. It's not going to be pleasant, but we got to hang in there. We got to keep paying attention, and we got to work together, and we can get through this. So.
And then I'll just leave on the toolkit I dropped in. We will be live clipping the 2 nomination hearings that are this week that we're focusing on, which is Hegseth tomorrow and Bondi Wednesday and Thursday. So
we'll have all kinds of resources and toolkits and everything coming at you guys. DemCast, we definitely took the holidays off, as many of you noticed. We were burnt out too, but we are back and we are ready to fight. So
yep. And if you're not in our reach or signal, I dropped the link in that you guys can join. So
all right.
Thank you, everybody.
Love you guys.